Rain drizzled gently over the countryside of Jeolla, as Han So-yeon stood still among the sea of black umbrellas, her gaze fixed on the earth swallowing the last traces of the man who had meant everything to her. The funeral was simple, elegant, yet heavy with unspoken tensions. Han Gyu-sik, the patriarch of one of the region's most prosperous farms, had passed away after a brief illness. And now, as his coffin disappeared beneath the soil, So-yeon felt not just grief, but a growing unease clawing at her chest. She was 31, raised as the adopted daughter of Han Gyu-sik. Though not his blood, he had always introduced her as his child, never as a burden or an outsider. His eyes had a way of softening every time they met hers, as if he needed no further proof of their bond. But that warmth had always clashed against the coldness of Min Ji-won, his second wife, and her son, Han Jun-ho. Min Ji-won stood stoically beside the grave, her face an impenetrable mask of propriety. Dressed impeccably, in mourning attire, she looked every bit the grieving widow, but her eyes never once turned toward So-yeon. They were focused instead on the mourners, surveying, calculating, and Jun-ho, only a few years younger than So-yeon, barely concealed his boredom. His black suit hung loosely from his frame, as though he had tried to dress the part but couldn't be bothered to inhabit it. They had always treated her as though she were a guest overstaying her welcome. Ji-won never raised her voice, but her every glance dripped with condescension. Her son had been more direct, calling So-yeon a stray taken in by pity. Yet their father had never wavered in his affection. He had built his farm from nothing, and over the years whispered to So-yeon his dreams of passing it on to someone who would truly love the land. Not someone who saw it as a financial asset, but as a legacy. So-yeon clutched her umbrella tighter, her knuckles white, her eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. There were none. The few workers who had served the family loyally over the years had either been dismissed or replaced in the months leading up to Gyu-sik's death. Even her father's longtime lawyer had retired suddenly just 2 weeks ago. Everything, it seemed, had been slowly shifting, but she hadn't noticed until it was too late. As the priest recited the final words, she felt Ji-won's gaze finally land on her. Cold, unreadable, a flicker of satisfaction, or was it just disdain? Then came Jun-ho's smirk, fleeting but unmistakable, before he turned to offer a comforting hand to his mother. It was then that So-yeon felt it, something beyond grief. Something was being hidden, something terrible. When the ceremony ended, people slowly began to disperse. No one approached So-yeon. She stood alone beneath the grey sky, the last to leave, staring at the fresh mound of earth as if willing her father to rise up and take back the silence he had left behind. Her heart ached not just from loss, but from a sense of betrayal she couldn't yet explain. Her father's last moments had been quiet. He had held her hand, his eyes glassy but alert. He hadn't said much, just smiled faintly. A tired, knowing smile. Then, just before closing his eyes forever, he looked at her with an expression she could not forget. There had been pain, yes, but also urgency, as if he had wanted to say more, as if he needed her to understand something important. That final glance haunted her now, more than any word could. So-yeon turned away from the grave and walked slowly toward the car that had brought her. The wind picked up slightly, brushing her black coat against her legs. Her heels sank slightly in the damp soil. In the distance, she saw Jun-ho laughing, quietly with a group of men near the edge of the cemetery. One of them handed him a cigarette, and he lit it without hesitation, his demeanor completely at odds with the mourning attire. She tried not to let the image affect her, tried not to let the anger that was bubbling inside overtake the sadness. But it was hard. So hard. She had loved Han Gyu-sik, with a loyalty few children ever offered their parents. She had nursed him. In his final weeks, managed the workers when he grew too ill to leave his bed, and made sure every harvest was recorded, every promise fulfilled. And now, in the silence of his absence, the walls of trust that had once surrounded her were crumbling. That night, So-yeon couldn't sleep. Back in the guest room of the family house, her room once before Min Ji-won had gradually stripped it of anything that made it hers, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far. Every creak in the wood sounded deliberate. She heard voices downstairs, laughter, Junho again, likely with friends. The house was not in mourning. It was celebrating something. She rose quietly, barefoot on the cool floorboards, and stepped into the hallway. The air was heavy with the scent of incense from the funeral. Downstairs, the light from the kitchen flickered briefly, and she caught a glimpse of Ji-won closing the door to her study. It was locked, as always. So-yeon turned back, her heart pounding, and returned to her room. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she realized something had changed irrevocably. Her father's death was only the beginning. That look in his eyes, that final desperate attempt to say something, it was not just emotion, it was a warning. She would soon understand what he had tried to protect her from, and what forces had already begun to move against her. The morning of the reading of Han Gyu-sik's will arrived with a suffocating stillness. So-yeon sat in the polished cold office of the family's legal representatives, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her nails digging into her skin. She had dressed simply, in a black blazer and slacks, her hair tied back, trying to project the composure she did not feel. Her heart beat wildly against her ribs, half in grief, half in dread. Across the table sat Min Ji-won, elegant as ever, her expression unreadable. Beside her, Han Junho lounged with infuriating nonchalance, one arm draped over the back of his chair, tapping his foot as though the entire procedure was nothing more than a formality, delaying his next party or business scheme. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with graying hair and glasses that slid down his nose, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As executor of the late Mr. Han Gyu-sik's estate, I will now proceed with the reading of the will." So-yeon straightened, her breath catching. This was it. The moment her father had often spoken about in quiet, conversations when he assured her time and again that her years of loyalty, love, and dedication to the farm would never go unnoticed or unrewarded. She remembered vividly his promise. "This land will be yours one day. You are the one who truly understands it." The lawyer unfolded the document slowly, adjusting his glasses. "I, Han Gyu-sik, being of sound mind, hereby declare the following as my last will and testament." A pause, the tension in the room thickened. "To my beloved wife, Min Ji-won, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all assets, properties, and financial holdings." So-yeon's head jerked up. "And to my son, Han Junho, I leave joint ownership of the Jeolla farm as well. Has all associated businesses, equipment, and agricultural patents." Her mouth went dry. There was nothing else, no mention of her name, not even a symbolic gesture, a token, or a letter. The lawyer cleared his throat again, shifting uncomfortably. "That concludes the reading of the will." For a full 10 seconds the room was silent, save for the ticking of a wall clock. Then came the soft, cruel chuckle from Junho, who leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "I guess that clears things up, doesn't it?" So-yeon stared at him, unable to speak, her brain refusing to process what she had just heard. Her father, the man who had raised her, who had sat with her under the ginkgo tree teaching her how to prune the branches just right, who had whispered promises of her rightful place, had left her nothing. No, this was impossible. This has to be a mistake," she finally managed, her voice trembling but firm. "This isn't possible. My father would never—" Ji-won's lips curved into a cold, thin smile. "It is exactly as—" he wished. "The documents are clear." "No," So-yeon stood abruptly, hands flat on the table. "No, he told me himself. The farm was supposed to be mine. He made it very clear. He even—" The lawyer raised his hands. "Miss Han, I understand this is upsetting, but the will is legally binding. Your father's intentions are outlined here, signed and notarized. There is no mention of any transfer of assets or ownership to you." She shook her head, the room spinning. "That's not true. There was a contract. He had it drafted. I saw it. He told me—" Junho laughed, loud and mocking. "A contract? Come on, Nuna. You must be imagining things. Or did you think you could forge one later?" His words hit like a slap. Her face burned with humiliation, but rage quickly overtook the shame. "How dare you?" "Oh, please," Ji-won interjected smoothly. We all know you've been living here off our kindness for years. It is only right that the legal heirs retain what belongs to the family." "I am family," So-yeon cried, fists clenched. "He raised me as his daughter." Ji-won's smile widened, but her eyes were ice. "Adopted, not blood." The words sliced through the air, sharp and deliberate. The lawyer stood, hastily gathering his papers. "If there are no further objections, the process is complete. Any legal disputes can be directed to the court." But So-yeon wasn't listening anymore. Her pulse roared in her ears. The betrayal was suffocating. This wasn't a mistake. This was orchestrated. The timing, the sudden retirement of the old family lawyer, the dismissal of the loyal farm workers, the secrecy surrounding the final days of her father's illness, it all painted a clear, ugly picture. They had planned this. Ji-won and Jun-ho had spent years preparing to cut her out completely, and now with her father gone, they had executed it perfectly. As she stormed out of the office, barely noticing the stares from passers-by, one thought, repeated in her mind like a drumbeat: "This isn't over. This cannot be over." The train from Jeonju back to the family estate felt longer than ever. Han So-yeon sat by the window, watching the farmlands blur past, her reflection staring back at her with hollow eyes. Her hands trembled in her lap as her thoughts raced in frantic loops. None of it made sense. No, it made too much sense. Every puzzle piece clicked together in the ugliest way possible. She could not forget the day her father, Han Gyu-sik, had shown her the contract. It was a crisp autumn afternoon 2 years prior. They had been walking through the persimmon orchard when he paused, glanced around to ensure no one was near, and pulled a folded document from his coat. "This," he had said, placing it in her hands, "is the transfer contract. The farm, the equipment, the businesses, everything. It will be yours, So-yeon. I cannot trust anyone else, not Ji-won, not Jun-ho." She remembered her hands trembling then, just as they trembled now. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to know it's real," he had answered. "I will finalize the will soon, but this contract ensures that even if something happens, you are protected." So-yeon had asked him to keep it safe himself. He had nodded, promising he would store it in the hidden safe in his study. The same safe only he and So-yeon knew about. But now, as the train rocked gently, a chilling realization settled over her like frost. Had someone found it? Back at the estate, So-yeon ignored the hostile glances of the staff, all recently hired by Ji-won, and went straight to her father's study. She knew Ji-won would be out for her usual Wednesday luncheon with a group of wealthy widows, and Jun-ho rarely woke before noon. This was her window. The study looked almost the same as it always had. The smell of old wood, the shelves lined with farming manuals and family photographs. But as she scanned the room, something felt wrong. Small details. The photo of her, father and her on the shelf, was gone, replaced by one of Ji-won and Jun-ho. The jade paperweight her father loved was missing from the desk. The chair was different, newer. Panic surged as she crossed the room to the bookshelf against the back wall. She knelt, pressing her fingers against the grooves in the floor where the hidden compartment should be. For years it had been their secret, a small safe built beneath the floorboards, disguised perfectly. Her heart pounded. Her fingers found the latch. She pulled. Empty. Nothing. No papers, no contracts, no ledgers. Not even the old notebooks her father kept meticulously for years. A wave of nausea hit her as she sat back on her heels. This couldn't be happening. Someone had found it. Someone had cleaned it out, thoroughly. For a few moments she sat frozen, staring at the hollow space. Then, forcing herself to breathe, she stood and scanned the room again. Maybe he had moved it. Maybe he had sensed the danger before the end. Desperately, she opened every drawer, every file cabinet. Nothing. Only sanitized files, invoices, utility bills, tax documents, all spotless, all meaningless. She slammed a drawer shut, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her father's handwriting was nowhere. His voice gone. Or was it? She stopped. There was still one more place. Crossing to the master bedroom, her pulse raced as she yanked open the closet where he kept an old chest, a battered wooden box filled with mementos from his youth. Childhood photos, army badges, and small keepsakes he refused to throw away. It was still there. Kneeling, she flipped open the lid. Her hands sifted quickly through old photographs, medals, and notebooks. Nothing. Then her fingers brushed something hard, smooth. Her small wooden pendant. Her pendant. It was carved in the shape of a ginkgo leaf, the tree they had planted together when she was 8 years old. A simple necklace her father had given her years ago, claiming it was for luck. She had worn it constantly as a child, but had packed it away as she grew older. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The pendant felt heavier than she remembered. Turning it over, she noticed for the first time that the wooden back was slightly loose, as if it had been glued and then carefully pried open at some point. Driven by instinct, she pressed against the seam with her thumb. Click. The back popped open. Inside, hidden beneath a false lining, was a tiny black USB drive. Her breath caught. Her heart skipped. What was this? She clutched the pendant to her chest, her mind spinning. Her father had hidden this for a reason. Not in the safe, not in the desk, not even in his locked study. But here, in something only she would recognize, only she would ever think to check. Standing, hands shaking, So-yeon knew with absolute certainty that this USB wasn't a keepsake. It was a message from her father, a message someone else had, desperately hoped she would never find. The afternoon sun hung low as Han So-yeon stood in front of the grand dining hall of the estate, her fists clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Her heart pounded with a mixture of rage and dread. The family dinner that Min Ji-won had organized was nothing more than a farce, a display of control. But tonight, So-yeon was done playing the part of the silent, obedient outsider. The Grand Suife. Room was filled with relatives, some distant, some close by blood, all connected through tangled threads of inheritance and interest. Crystal chandeliers bathed the polished wood in golden light. Servers dressed in black moved silently between the tables, pouring wine and serving dishes as if oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. So-yeon stepped through the doorway, her presence causing an immediate hush. Conversations faltered, forks froze mid-air, all heads turned toward her. Ji-won, seated at the head of the table, lifted her chin slightly, her lips curving into a controlled, icy smile. "Well?" Ji-won drawled, her voice smooth as silk laced with poison. "I wondered if you would have the decency to show up." Jun-ho, reclining lazily in his chair, snorted. "Decency? Nahana doesn't know the meaning of the word." So-yeon inhaled deeply, pushing aside the knot in her throat. "I'm not here for pleasantries. We need to talk, all of us." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few aunts exchanged uneasy glances. One elderly uncle cleared his throat as if sensing the impending storm, but wisely chose silence. Ji-won set her wineglass down with deliberate care. "Oh? About what?" "You know exactly about what," So-yeon said, her voice sharp, controlled. "About the contract, the one father made, the one that has conveniently disappeared." A ripple of gasps broke through the guests. Jun-ho sat forward, his eyes gleaming with mockery. "A contract? What are you talking about?" "Do not pretend," So-yeon snapped. "Father showed it to me. He transferred the farm and its assets to me long before he passed. I want it back." For a moment silence reigned. Then Ji-won laughed, soft, musical, and utterly cruel. "Oh, So-yeon, I expected better from you, truly." She gestured gracefully to the crowd. "You all heard her, yes? She accuses us, her family, of theft, of conspiracy." Jun-ho leaned back, grinning. "Or maybe," he said, voice dripping, "with false concern, our dear sister here has decided to try her luck at forgery." A few gasps echoed again. A cousin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly very interested in his glass. "That's not true," So-yeon's voice cracked with fury. "You know it's not true. Father trusted me because I worked this land. I stood by him, unlike either of you." Ji-won's mask slipped for the briefest second, a flicker of annoyance quickly buried beneath practiced poise. "Such imaginative accusations, truly." But unfortunately, darling, imagination does not hold up in court. Junho stood, slamming his hands onto the table. "Enough of this!" he bellowed, startling several guests. "You were never more than an adopted charity case. You don't belong here. You never did." So-yeon's hands trembled, but she refused to back down. "Father never treated me like charity. I was his daughter." "Legally, no," Ji-won said coldly. "Biologically, certainly not." "I have the truth," So-yeon said, her voice steadying despite the lump in her throat. "And soon everyone will know." Ji-won stood then, her face an ice sculpture of rage barely held in check. "You are delusional and dangerous. You dare come into my home spreading lies after everything we gave you? You are nothing but a thief," Junho spat, cutting her off. "You are a thief." The word hung in the air, heavy as lead. So-yeon's breath caught, her vision blurred, but not from tears, from fury, from disbelief that this was how far they would go, to twist everything, to rewrite reality. Around the table no one moved, no one spoke, not a single person stood to defend her. Eyes turned away. Plates were suddenly fascinating. Glasses were refilled just to avoid her gaze. She was alone. Utterly alone. Ji-won smoothed her blouse, straightened her posture, and with a voice sweet as poisoned honey said, "Leave, now, before we call the police and report attempted fraud." For a moment, So-yeon couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her legs felt like stone. Then somehow, her body obeyed. Her feet turned. Her steps echoed against the marble floor as she walked out of the room. Behind her, whispers rose. Laughter, Junho's, chased her down the hallway. As she reached the front doors, the cool night air hit her like a slap. Her chest heaved, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not where they could see. Not where they could win. They wanted her to break. She would not break, not yet. The city of Busan welcomed Han So-yeon with the smell of sea salt and diesel. It was a sharp contrast to the quiet, sprawling farmlands of Jeolla. Here life moved fast, indifferent to individual sorrow or betrayal. The neon lights blinked endlessly, the streets pulsed with energy, but within her chest only a hollow silence remained. She had left the family estate with nothing but a small suitcase, hastily packed with a few clothes and the wooden pendant that now felt heavier than anything else she owned. Every step away from that house had felt like walking further, from everything familiar, and yet there was no home left for her there. Her only refuge now was the small apartment of Lee Hee-jin, a former college friend who had insisted she come stay when she heard the vaguest details of what had happened. Hee-jin had always been blunt, fiercely independent, and completely uninterested in the pretensions of wealth or family politics. When So-yeon called, her voice shaking, Hee-jin simply said, "Get on the next train. You're not fighting this alone." The apartment was cramped but warm, tucked on the third floor of a worn building near the fish market. Faded curtains swayed in the ocean breeze, and the furniture bore the marks of years but offered comfort no mansion ever could. That first night, So-yeon barely spoke. Hee-jin didn't push. She handed her a cup of hot barley tea, wrapped her in a thick blanket, and left her alone in the guest room. There in the dim light, So-yeon finally allowed the dam to break. Tears came silently at first, then in waves, racking her body until there was nothing left but exhaustion. When dawn arrived, so did clarity. She sat on the floor, her suitcase open, sorting through the meager belongings she had managed to grab. A couple of old notebooks, a framed photo of her with her father beneath the ginkgo tree, a photo Ji-won must have missed in her quiet erasure, and, resting at the very bottom, the wooden pendant. She turned it over in her hands. The tiny USB drive inside still felt impossibly heavy for its size. What could it possibly contain? Documents? Letters? Or was it just some desperate attempt by her father to leave her a memory, a farewell? Her heart pounded as she plugged it into her laptop. A folder popped open. It was labeled simply, "For So-yeon." Her breath hitched. She double-clicked. Inside, several files appeared. Videos, PDFs, audio recordings. Her hands trembled as she clicked on the first video. The screen flickered. Then, her father's face appeared. He sat at his old desk, the one now emptied, his eyes more tired than she remembered, but filled with the same determined warmth. He wore his usual plain linen shirt, sleeves rolled, a pen tucked behind one ear. "So-yeon," his voice cracked slightly, "if you're watching this, then something has gone terribly wrong." She pressed her hand to her mouth, choking back a sob. "I don't know how much time I have left," he continued, eyes glancing once toward the door as if expecting to be interrupted. "But you need to know, I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, trusting the wrong people, being too soft, too blind." He leaned forward, his face filling the screen. "Ji-won and Junho, they've been stealing from me, from us, for years." Her breath left her in a sharp gasp. "I discovered it too late. Bank accounts opened in my name, assets quietly transferred, documents forged. I confronted them, but by then my health was failing and I realized if I pushed too hard they might do worse than steal." The camera shook slightly as he sighed, running a hand over his face. "So I did what I could. I changed the will, I drafted new contracts, everything. Everything should belong to you. You are the only one who deserves it. You've cared for this land. You've been the heart of it, not them." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "But I'm afraid they'll destroy the documents. Afraid they already have. That's why I'm leaving this here. On this drive are copies, scans of the contract, the new will, and recordings of everything." So-yeon froze, her fingers trembling. Her father continued, his voice firmer now. "You have to fight them. They will lie. They will call you a thief. They will call you worse. But the truth is here. They cannot erase this." The video ended, abruptly. She stared at the black screen, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Quickly she opened the folders. Dozens of files, PDFs with bank records, clear evidence of money siphoned into private accounts under Ji-won's name. Scans of her father's signature, and next to it comparative scans, her father's neat handwriting against crude forgeries. Audio files, recordings of conversations between Ji-won and Junho. She clicked one. Ji-won's voice. "Once. The old man is gone, the girl's finished. No one will believe her, she has no blood right." Junho's laughter followed. "Yeah, let her cry. Let her scream. It won't change a thing." So-yeon's fingers curled into fists. Her breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. Her vision blurred, but not from tears. From fury, from vindication. The truth was here, in her hands. They had stolen everything. But they had not silenced her father, not fully. And now it was her turn. Han So-yeon sat motionless, staring at the laptop screen as the second video loaded. The weight of the truth she had just uncovered pressed down on her chest, almost suffocating. Her father's voice, his face, his words. They were no longer memories. They were proof. Proof of everything she had feared. Proof that everything stolen from her was not just betrayal, but a meticulously orchestrated crime. The video flickered again. Her father appeared, this time seated at the old wooden table in the farmhouse kitchen, the ginkgo tree visible through the window behind. Him. His hands were clasped tightly, the knuckles white with tension. "So-yeon," he began, his voice lower, rougher. "There are things you must understand. Things I should have told you a long time ago." He paused, glancing down at the table, then back into the camera. "I loved your mother," he said softly. "Not the woman you knew as Ji-won, your real mother. She was everything to me. But when she passed, I was broken, and that's when Ji-won entered my life. She was clever, beautiful, and I was a fool." His hands trembled visibly. "She pretended to care, pretended to love this family. But from the start it was about the money, about the land, about the legacy. I saw it too late to stop her from poisoning everything." He swallowed, the pain etched deep in his features. "For years I dismissed the signs, the missing money, the strange transactions. I thought maybe it was my memory failing. Maybe I had signed things I didn't remember. Maybe I was getting old." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "But it wasn't me, it was them, Ji-won and Junho together. Slowly, quietly, they started draining the accounts, moving assets, forging my signature. They even bribed my lawyer, the man I trusted for 20 years. His hands unclenched long enough for him to pick up a piece of paper from the table. He held it to the camera. A bank statement. Dozens of unauthorized withdrawals and transfers, all signed under his name. "This," he said, "this is one of many. I collected everything, every piece I could find." He set the paper down and leaned forward, his face filling the frame. "Then, I rewrote the will. So-Yon's breath hitched. I drafted a new contract, transferring the farm, the equipment, the business rights, everything to you because, So-Yon, you are my daughter. Blood or not, you are the one who stood by me. You are the one who carried this family when others only saw it as a bank." His eyes softened, but grief still clouded them. "But I knew they would try to destroy it. Ji-won, she's ruthless. Junho, he's greedy and reckless, but he listens to her. I suspect they already have plans. I suspect they might even tamper with this very will." His voice lowered, trembling slightly. "If you're watching this, it means they succeeded. It means they won, at least for now." He closed his eyes for a long moment before continuing, but not completely. Not yet. The camera shifted slightly as he reached out, dragging a small pile of documents into view. Passports, contracts, notarized statements. These are digital copies, scanned and stored. Some are originals I photographed in secret. Others are audio recordings, conversations I captured between Ji-won and Junho. Proof of the theft, proof of the forgery, proof of the betrayal. He pressed his hands flat against the table, his gaze hardening. "You have to fight them, not just for yourself, for this farm, for everything we built together, for the truth." The screen flickered again as the video skipped, the mark of a hastily recorded file, but his voice returned softer this time. "I regret many things, not protecting you better, not seeing sooner what they were, but I do not regret loving you. You are my child. You always will be." A long pause. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "Do not let them erase you, So-Yon. Do not let them rewrite the story of this family. You are the legacy, not them." The video faded to black. For a long time, So-Yon sat frozen. The laptop's screensaver eventually kicked in, casting soft glows of moving lines across her face. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her nails left crescent moons on her palms. The rage was there, the grief was there. But beneath it all, something stronger began to bloom. A resolve. A certainty. Her father had believed in her, had trusted her, and had prepared her even in death to fight for what was rightfully hers. She closed the video folder and opened the next, the audio files. One by one, she listened. Ji-won's voice, cold and calculated. "I do not care what that old man thinks. Once the papers are gone, the law is ours." And Junho's laughter. "Let her cry, let her scream. No one will listen. No one ever does." They were wrong. Someone would listen, and it would start now. With her. The morning light seeped through the curtains, casting a pale glow over the cramped apartment. Han So-Yon sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open. Papers spread out like a battlefield around her. Her eyes were bloodshot, her fingers stained with ink from hours of sorting, printing, highlighting, and cross-referencing. Sleep had not come. It could not. Not now. Every document, every recording, every file from the USB was catalogued, backed up on 3 separate drives, and uploaded to a secure cloud account under an alias. Her father had done more than leave her his last words. He had left her a weapon. But a weapon was useless if she did not know how to wield it. Lee Hee-jin, her friend and now her closest ally, slid a cup of coffee across the table. "You look like you're about to wage a war." "I am," So-Yon said without lifting her gaze. Hee-jin pulled out a chair, sitting with arms crossed. "Then you're going to need an army." So-Yon nodded. "That's why I need your help." The plan began to form between them. It couldn't be a simple confrontation. Ji-won and Junho were too powerful within the local community. Their web of influence stretched beyond the family. Local officials, banks, business partners, and even parts of the media were under their thumb. The first step was legal. She needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. Someone unconnected to Jeolla, someone impossible to intimidate or buy. Through an old contact of Hyejin's, they found him, Park Hyun-seok, a firebrand attorney from Seoul, known for taking down corporate fraud rings and political corruption cases. His reputation was spotless, and his fees matched it. But the moment he saw the files So-yeon presented, his expression hardened. "This," he whispered, flipping through the forged signatures, listening to the audio where Ji-won outlined her plan to erase So-yeon from the family line. "This is a bomb." "Can we win?" So-yeon asked, her voice steady but laced with dread. "We do not just win," Hyun-seok said, tapping the table. "We bury them." He explained the process. First, submit an injunction to freeze all estate assets before Ji-won and Jun-ho could hide or transfer them. Then file a civil lawsuit for fraud, forgery, and theft of inheritance. In parallel, submit the evidence to the prosecutor's office for a criminal investigation. But Hyun-seok warned her, "They will not go quietly. They will fight like cornered animals, and they will come for you." "I'm ready," she replied. But legal action alone wouldn't be enough. The family had spent years cultivating an image, benevolent, respectable pillars of the community. If the public saw So-yeon as just the adopted outsider trying to steal what wasn't hers, no amount of truth would matter. So the second step was exposure. She compiled a list of her father's old allies. Former employees dismissed under mysterious circumstances, business partners who had been edged out when Ji-won tightened her grip, neighbors who had watched the family from the outside but were too afraid or too polite to speak. Hyejin handled the media. A local journalist named Kang Min-jun, who had a history of reporting on corruption despite pressure, agreed to meet. When he saw the videos, especially the one of Han Gyu-sik's confession, he paled. "Are you prepared for this to become public?" he asked. "I want it to," So-yeon answered. "I need everyone to know the truth." Min-jun promised to begin background research immediately. "But timing will be everything. Drop it too soon and they'll spin it. Drop it right and it will be impossible for them to recover." While Hyun-seok prepared the legal filings and Min-jun started drafting the exposé, So-yeon crafted personal letters, not to Ji-won, not to Jun-ho, but to the elders of the community, to the former farm workers who had loved her father, to the agricultural board members who had once respected the Han family name. Each letter was direct, honest. She enclosed copies of key pieces of evidence, not everything, just enough to plant the seed of doubt in those who had only heard Ji-won's version of the story. By the end of the third day, the first ripples had already begun. A retired farm manager called her in tears. "I always knew something was wrong. Your father, he never would have abandoned you." An old supplier left a voicemail. "Tell me how I can help. I never trusted that woman." Even a member of the Jeolla Agricultural Cooperative messaged anonymously, offering confidential information about strange loan approvals and financial manipulations orchestrated by Jun-ho. And yet, the other side was moving too. On the fourth morning, Hyejin burst into the apartment, breathless. "They know, Ji-won knows something's happening." "How?" "There's a rumor spreading fast that you're trying to blackmail the family, that you fabricated evidence." So-yeon closed her eyes. Of course, they're getting ahead of it. Hyejin placed a hand on her shoulder. "Doesn't change the plan. If anything, it proves they're scared." Her phone buzzed again. Another message, from an unknown number. "You should stop before you regret it." So-yeon stared at it, felt the cold settle into her bones. But then, just as quickly, the fire in her chest burned hotter. She stood, straightened her back. "Let them be scared," she said. "They're about to learn what regret really means." The skies over Jeolla were heavy with low grey clouds, as if the earth itself sensed that something was about to shift. Han So-yeon stood on the rooftop of Hyejin's apartment, staring out at the distant sea. The wind carried the salty scent of waves and something sharper, the electric tension that precedes a storm. Her phone buzzed. Another confirmation, another ally. The last week had been a blur of motion. Letters sent, meetings held, files distributed. Everything was now set in motion. Every document, every video, every recording had been shared with a carefully selected group. former farm employees who had been unjustly fired, trusted family friends who had once admired her father but grew distant under Jiwon's rule, even members of the agricultural board who had turned a blind eye for years but now found themselves holding evidence too damning to ignore. Attorney Park Hyun-suk had worked without pause. The injunction was officially filed. The court had frozen all transactions related to the Han estate pending investigation. Jiwon and Junho could no longer move money, sell property or alter ownership records without a judge's approval. That single blow had already sent shockwaves through the community. The journalist Kang Min-jun, true to his word, had spent days corroborating every fact, cross-checking dates and interviewing silent voices now willing to speak. The article was ready, a scathing expose complete with screenshots of the forged documents, transcripts of damning conversations, and most devastating of all, clips from the video where Han Gyu-sik confessed everything. But Min-jun was holding it for now, waiting for the precise moment. The moment So-yeon gave the signal. The calm before the storm. Inside the apartment, Hye-jin sat cross-legged on the floor, reviewing a spreadsheet that tracked who had received evidence, who had responded, and who had yet to reply. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates from allies, some cautious, some furious on So-yeon's behalf. "You know," Hye-jin said without looking up, "I think they still don't fully realize what's coming." "They will," So-yeon replied, stepping back inside. "Soon." But the enemy wasn't idle. 2 days prior, a lawyer representing Ji-won had filed a countersuit, accusing So-yeon of attempted fraud, defamation, and harassment. A transparent attempt to muddy the waters. Hyun-seok had anticipated it. He filed an immediate counter-motion, backed by the mountain of evidence that made the accusation almost laughable. Still, Ji-won's strategy was clear: stall, distract, spread doubt. And it was working as to a degree. Gossip swirled across Jeolla. In cafes, in markets, people whispered. Some said So-yeon was an ingrate, trying to steal what wasn't hers. Others argued she had always been the real heir, the one who had worked the land while Junho chased business schemes and Ji-won hosted charity luncheons. At the heart of it all, So-yeon remained focused. The doubts, the whispers, they didn't matter, only the truth mattered. That afternoon another message arrived, this one from Mr. Choi, the oldest surviving manager of the farm, long retired. "I have something. Something your father gave me a long time ago, just in case. I didn't know if I should keep it, but I think now is the time. Meet me." So-yeon's hands tightened around the phone. Just in case. Her father had been planning for every possibility. She and Hye-jin drove an hour out of the city to a small fishing village where Mr. Choi lived. The man was frail now, his hands gnarled with age, but his eyes were sharp. "I kept this because your father asked me to," he said, pulling out. An old envelope, yellowed with time but sealed with wax, the same wax seal her father had used for official documents. "He told me, if anything ever happened and you came looking for the truth, I was to give this to you." Inside was a handwritten letter, her father's unmistakable penmanship, and a key. "The storage unit on the edge of the North Orchard," the ISA letter read. "Inside, behind the second wall, is everything. Originals, ledgers, paper trails they could not erase." Her heart pounded. For years, the storage unit had sat abandoned, dusty and forgotten. No one had thought it more than a shed for broken tools. Even Ji-won and Junho had dismissed it. Driving back, So-yeon felt the last pieces fall into place. At the unit, she and Hye-jin pried open the rusty door. Dust clouded the air. In the back, hidden behind stacked crates, was a false wall. They pushed it aside. Boxes, files, her father's, notebooks, bank statements, handwritten records going back over 10 years, photocopies of every suspicious transaction, physical contracts with signatures, some real, some crudely forged. Hye-jin laughed bitterly. "This isn't just proof. This is an avalanche." They scanned everything that night, added it to the existing files, sent copies to Hyun-seok and Min-jun, sent backups to secure digital vaults. Ji-won and Junho were walking straight into a trap, and they didn't even know it yet. By the next morning, the court issued a formal summons, a mandatory family meeting enforced by law under the pretext of mediating the dispute before the formal trial began. But with the press sniffing, with whispers growing louder, it would be far from private. Hyun-seok looked at So-yeon as they prepared the final documents. "Are you ready?" she answered without hesitation. "More than ever." The calm was breaking. The storm was about to begin. The day dawned heavy and oppressive, as if the air itself braced for confrontation. The grand meeting hall at the Jeolla Agricultural Cooperative was packed beyond capacity. Rows of chairs filled with extended family, old friends of the Han family, business associates, members of the agricultural board, and curious locals who had caught wind of the drama unfolding behind closed doors. Whispers floated like smoke, thick with speculation and tension. At the front of the room, a long table was set for the principal parties. On one side, Min Ji-won sat dressed in a pristine ivory suit, her face a carefully crafted mask of dignity. Beside her, Han Jun-ho wore an expensive grey blazer, arms crossed, jaw set tight, a cocky grin flickering on his lips like a shield. On the other side sat Han So-yeon. Her black blazer was plain, her face calm, composed, but beneath the surface her blood surged with the fire of every betrayal, every humiliation. Flanking her was attorney Park Hyun-seok, his expression sharp and cold, a man who had built a career dismantling corruption. The moderator, an appointed legal officer, cleared his throat. "This meeting has been convened as a preliminary hearing under the supervision of the court. Both parties will have the opportunity to present their claims before formal litigation." "Proceeds." Ji-won raised a hand delicately. "Before we begin, I would like the record to show that this gathering is both unnecessary and cruel. My late husband's wishes were clear. My stepson and I are here merely to honor the process, not because there is any merit to these baseless accusations." Jun-ho chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, let's get this over with." The moderator turned to So-yeon. "Miss Han, you may proceed." Hyun-seok tapped the table lightly. "Thank you. What you are about to witness is not an accusation. It is a revelation." He clicked a remote. The large screen behind them came to life. For a moment, only static. Then Han Gyu-sik appeared, alive again, in motion, speaking directly to everyone in the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ji-won's back stiffened. Jun-ho's grin faltered, his foot tapping now stilled. On the screen, Gyu-sik's voice filled the hall. "If you are watching this, then something has gone terribly wrong." His confession unfolded in full, the revelation of years of financial theft, of forged documents, of manipulated records. He spoke of his regret, of his love for So-yeon, and his decision to transfer the entirety of his estate to her, not out of favoritism, but as a recognition of her loyalty, her dedication, her role as his true heir. As the video continued, murmurs became shocked exclamations. He knew. They betrayed him. How could they? Ji-won's mask cracked, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes darting, calculating. Her lips trembled, but no words came. Jun-ho lurched forward, slamming his palm on the table. "This is fake. This is fabricated." Hyun-seok didn't flinch. "Is it?" He tapped again. The screen split into documents, bank statements showing the illegal transfers, audio recordings played, Ji-won's voice, cold and sharp. "Once the papers are gone, the girl's finished. No one will believe her." Another voice, Jun-ho's laughter. "Yeah, let her cry, let her scream, it won't change a thing." Every word echoed like thunder. The moderator paled. The audience erupted, some gasping, some rising from their chairs, others shaking their heads in disbelief. You edited this," Ji-won finally snapped, her voice rising, losing the cold control she always wielded. "This is manipulation. This is—" Hyun-seok silenced her with a raised hand. "We have not just digital files, we have originals." He pointed toward a table where boxes sat, physical documents retrieved from the hidden storage in the faux orchard, signed contracts, handwritten ledgers, correspondence. "Would you like us to go through them page by page?" For the first time, true panic flickered in Ji-won's eyes. Jun-ho stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "This is a setup. It's her word against ours. No, So-yeon said, her voice cutting through the noise, firm and unwavering. It's not my word, it's his. She stood then, holding up the wooden pendant. He gave me this, not as jewelry, as a key to the truth, a truth you tried to bury. Her gaze swept the room, locking eyes with faces that had once looked away in shame, in doubt, in suspicion. For years, I worked this land. I stood by my father's side while others treated me like an outsider, and even now you tried to erase me. A wave of murmurs grew louder. Some nodded. Some looked away, ashamed. But the truth does not disappear, So-yeon continued. Not when it's written in every seed planted, in every harvest brought in every sacrifice made. Ji-won slammed her hands on the table. This is slander! No, the moderator said quietly, his voice trembling. This is evidence. A court officer, previously seated quietly, rose and approached. Per order of the district court, and in light of the presented evidence, all assets of the Han estate will remain frozen. Furthermore, criminal charges of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement are being formally reviewed. Ji-won opened her mouth, then closed it, color draining from her face. Jun-ho backed away, as if the weight of the room itself pushed him down. The moderator nodded. This meeting is concluded. The audience erupted, some applauding quietly, others simply standing in stunned silence. The tide had turned. As Ji-won and Jun-ho were escorted out, their faces masks of fury and disbelief, So-yeon stood still, breathing deeply, letting the tension, the rage, the years of injustice begin to lift. It was not over yet. But the truth was no longer a secret. It was a weapon, and the world had finally seen it. The cold marble floors of the Jeolla District Court echoed with the sounds of hurried footsteps, murmured conversations, and the occasional clack of a judge's gavel from distant courtrooms. For Han So-yeon, every step toward the courtroom felt like walking deeper into the heart of everything she had fought against her entire life: prejudice, betrayal, abandonment. But this time, she did not walk in alone. Attorney Park Hyun-seok walked beside her, a calm, impenetrable presence, his briefcase loaded with an arsenal of evidence. Behind them, Kang Min-jun from the press, along with several reporters and community members who had followed the unfolding scandal, filled the public gallery. No one in Jeolla was indifferent anymore. Everyone wanted to see how it would end. At the defense table, Min Ji-won sat rigid, her pristine white blazer now looking more like a desperate shield than a fashion choice. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line of defiance. Beside her, Han Jun-ho scowled, his hands tapping restlessly against the wood, the arrogance that once defined him now replaced by a barely concealed panic. The courtroom stood as a symbol of final judgment, clean, clinical, inescapable. All rise, the bailiff announced as the judge entered, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for intolerance toward corruption. The judge settled into her seat, scanning the files before her. This court is now in session to hear the case of Han So-yeon versus Min Ji-won and Han Jun-ho regarding charges of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and unlawful seizure of inheritance. Her gaze swept the room, landing briefly on each party. Given the nature of the evidence submitted, this hearing will determine whether the case proceeds to full trial or if summary judgment is warranted. Hyun-seok stood. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. My client, Han So-yeon, presents not only documented proof of forgery, including falsified wills and contracts, but also direct audio and video evidence of the defendants conspiring to defraud her of her lawful inheritance. The judge nodded. Proceed with your opening statements. Hyun-seok paced slowly, his voice steady, deliberate. This case is about more than documents. It is about a betrayal of the most fundamental kind: family. The defendants systematically, over the course of several years, manipulated, deceived, and ultimately erased the rightful heir from her place. But their arrogance led them to believe that no one would ever find out. He gestured toward the evidence table stacked with files. What they did not anticipate was that the truth leaves footprints. When it was Ji-won's turn, her lawyer rose, already sweating. Your Honor, this is a a misunderstanding, a tragic family dispute, inflated by grief. These supposed recordings are taken out of context. The documents, well, any number of people could have fabricated these digital files. The judge raised an eyebrow. You are suggesting that the late Mr. Han Gyusik fabricated his own confession video? A painful silence followed. Ji-won's lawyer cleared his throat but said nothing more. The judge nodded to Hyun Seok. Present the primary evidence. The lights dimmed. On the screen, Han Gyusik's video confession played. His voice filled the courtroom, recounting every theft, every forged document, every painful realization that the family he had tried to hold together was tearing itself apart from within. The judge watched without blinking. When the video ended, Hyun Seok clicked to the next file, bank statements highlighting the trail of stolen funds. The judge examined the signatures, cross-referenced against verified samples. Then came the audio recordings, Ji-won's clipped, calculating tone, Junho's mocking laughter, their voices, undeniable, laying bare their plan. When the recordings finished, the courtroom was deathly silent. The judge leaned forward. Defendants, do you have anything to say in response to this evidence? Ji-won stood abruptly, slamming her palms on the table. This is a setup. That girl, she was never part of this family. She was nothing but— Sit down, Mrs. Min, the judge interrupted, her tone cutting. You will maintain decorum in this court. Junho muttered under his breath. This is ridiculous. The judge's gaze snapped to him. Speak up, Mr. Han. He clenched his jaw but said nothing more. The prosecution presented the documents found in the hidden storage unit, physical originals with the same signatures, dates matching the fraudulent transactions. The judge examined each one carefully. When both sides had rested, the judge folded her hands. Given the overwhelming corroborated evidence submitted, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed with formal charges of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement against Min Ji-won and Han Junho. Furthermore, the claim regarding the unlawful seizure of inheritance is upheld. The revised contract and will, as presented in the digital and physical formats, are recognized as legitimate pending formal verification by forensic experts. Ji-won gasped. Junho slammed his fist into the table. You can't do this. Silence, the judge ordered, her voice like steel. You will respect this court. She continued. Given the risk of continued financial manipulation and witness intimidation, the defendants are placed under asset freeze orders effective immediately. Any attempt to liquidate or transfer property will be treated as contempt of court. The judge's eyes narrowed. You may prepare for trial, or, she added pointedly, consider whether plea bargains are in your best interest. With the bang of the gavel, the session adjourned. As Ji-won and Junho were escorted from the courtroom, their faces drained of color. So-yeon stood still. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from release, the first breath of justice filling her lungs. It was not finished, but the walls that once closed her in were now closing in on them. The air in the courtroom was suffocating with tension. Weeks had passed since the preliminary hearing, and the trial had unfolded like a slow, relentless avalanche. Every day brought new revelations, new layers of deceit uncovered, new witnesses who had once stayed silent but now stepped forward, emboldened by the flood of undeniable truth. On the prosecution's side, the evidence was a fortress, unassailable. Every forged signature, every falsified bank transfer, every whispered conspiracy recorded on audio was laid bare for the court. Handwriting experts confirmed the blatant forgery of Han Gyusik's signature on the fraudulent will that Ji-won and Junho had presented. Forensic accountants meticulously traced the siphoned funds, revealing a decade-long scheme to drain the estate of over 100 billion won. Witnesses testified. Former employees who had been dismissed under suspicious circumstances, accountants pressured into altering records, even distant relatives who admitted with bowed heads that they had been bribed into silence or manipulation. Min Ji-won's defense crumbled faster than anyone could have anticipated. Her attorneys shifted from defiance to desperation, attempting to negotiate, to discredit, to stall. But the mountain of proof was insurmountable. As the final day of the trial arrived, the courtroom was packed. Journalists filled every available space. The scandal had become national news, the tale of the betrayed daughter, the corrupt stepmother, and the greedy half-brother captured the nation's imagination. The judge entered, her robes flowing, her face set in the same stern expression she had worn since the beginning. Her gavel struck once. "This court will now deliver its verdict." Silence reigned. She began, voice clear, firm, and absolute. "After reviewing all submitted evidence, hearing all testimonies, and considering the arguments presented by both parties, this court finds the defendants, Min Ji-won and Han Jun-ho, guilty on all counts." Gasps echoed through the room. Guilty of fraud, guilty of forgery, guilty of embezzlement, guilty of obstruction of justice. Her gaze shifted, piercing through Ji-won and Jun-ho, as if stripping away every layer of pretense. The actions of the defendants were not only criminal, but demonstrated a profound and sustained pattern of malicious intent. This court recognizes the calculated systemic efforts to defraud the rightful heir, Han So-yeon, of her lawful inheritance. Ji-won's composure shattered. Her hands trembled. Her face, once an impenetrable mask, twisted in disbelief, rage, and a creeping desperation. Jun-ho sat rigid, his lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting wildly as if searching for some last impossible escape. "The fraudulent will presented by the defendants is hereby declared null and void," the judge continued. "The revised will and contract, as recorded digitally and confirmed by physical documentation recovered from the estate's private storage, are recognized as the legitimate and binding legal instruments." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The ownership of the Han estate, including the agricultural lands, all associated businesses and financial assets, is legally and fully transferred to Han So-yeon." A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery, but the judge silenced them with a sharp glance. Furthermore, the court imposes the following sentences. Min Ji-won is sentenced to 7 years in prison for conspiracy to commit fraud, document forgery, financial embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Han Jun-ho is sentenced to 5 years in prison on the same charges, with consideration for his lesser role in the orchestration, but significant participation in execution. Ji-won stood abruptly, her voice rising to a shriek. "No, this is a mistake, this court, this is a setup. I was his wife. This can't happen." The bailiffs moved toward her. She stumbled back, shaking her head violently, but there was nowhere left to run. Jun-ho slammed his hands on the table. "You can't do this. We built that farm. You built nothing," So-yeon said quietly, but her words cut sharper than any gavel. "You only ever stole." The judge's gavel struck again. "Order." She finalized the ruling. All properties illegally transferred are to be reverted immediately. Fines totaling 30 billion won are levied against the defendants, to be paid to the estate for damages. Furthermore, any attempts to appeal without new significant evidence will be denied. The courtroom erupted, reporters scribbling. Furiously, flashes from cameras illuminating Ji-won's pale, crumbling figure as she was led away in handcuffs. Jun-ho followed, head bowed, his once arrogant stride reduced to a hollow shuffle. So-yeon remained seated for a long moment, her hands trembling, her breath uneven. She had imagined this moment countless times. What it would feel like. Whether it would bring satisfaction, whether it would heal, it did not heal, but it did close a wound that had bled for far too long. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of release. Silent, steady. Attorney Park Hyun-seok placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's done." She nodded, whispering, "It's done." As the courtroom cleared, supporters approached her, old workers from the farm, neighbors who once looked at her with pity but now with respect, people who said softly, "We always hoped you would win." Her father's voice echoed in her, memory from that video, from a lifetime of quiet, steady love. "Do not let them erase you, So-yeon," and she hadn't. The judge's final words lingered in the air as the courtroom emptied. Justice is not always swift, but it is inevitable for those who carry the truth. The road to the Han family farm stretched ahead, lined with rows of ginkgo trees whose leaves shimmered gold in the morning sun. As Han So-yeon stepped out of the car, a cool breeze carried the scent of soil, fresh grass, and something deeper, the undeniable living memory of a place she had once called home. The farmhouse stood just as she remembered it. Sturdy wooden beams, whitewashed walls, the tiled roof weathered but still proud against the wide-open sky. But it felt different now. No longer a place of exile, no longer a cage. Now it was hers, not by blood but by truth. As she walked toward the front gate, a sound rose, hesitant at first, then stronger. Applause, from the workers, from old hands who had returned, faces she had not seen in years, men and women who had once worked alongside her and her father, who had been dismissed or driven away under Ji-won's rule, now stood gathered by the barn. Mr. Choi, the retired farm manager who had given her the letter that led to the final piece of evidence, stepped forward, his old cap in hand, his voice thick. "Welcome." "Home, Miss So-yeon." She smiled, her throat tightening. "No, just So-yeon, no titles, we're family here." The applause grew louder. Some laughed, others wiped away quiet tears. They encircled her, offering bows, handshakes, embraces, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, respect, recognition. Inside the farmhouse, little had changed physically, yet everything felt transformed. The living room still bore the creases of her father's presence. The worn leather armchair, the wooden shelves lined with books on soil science, irrigation methods, and crop rotation. The kitchen still smelled faintly of herbs dried years ago, but the heavy shadow, the cold, suffocating absence imposed by Ji-won and Jun-ho, was gone, swept away like dust in a storm. She walked through the house slowly, fingers grazing, familiar surfaces. In her old room, the one Ji-won had stripped bare years ago, she found a single object left untouched, the small ginkgo sapling drawing her father had framed when she was 10, with their names scribbled in his neat handwriting, at the bottom. Planted together, grown together. Her breath caught. The farm itself bore scars of neglect but remained resilient. Some greenhouses stood empty, equipment rusted from disuse, certain fields overgrown where Jun-ho had prioritized quick profit ventures instead of proper maintenance. But the land was alive, waiting, ready. By afternoon she gathered the workers under the ginkgo tree, the very tree planted on the day her father had officially adopted her. Its wide branches spread like open arms, leaves shimmering in the tea. "Breeze, I know," she began, voice steady, "that the past few years have been difficult. I know promises were broken. Trust was shattered. Many of you were pushed out, forgotten." A hush settled over them. "But that ends now. This farm is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who poured their hands, their sweat, their hearts into this land. Starting today, we rebuild. Together." Nods. A few murmured affirmations. "We will restore the greenhouses, repair the equipment, switch back to sustainable crop cycles. No more shortcuts, no more exploitation. What my father built was never meant to be just a business. It was a legacy of care, of responsibility, to the land and to each other." Mr. Choi smiled, lifting his cap. "We're with you." The farm came alive in a way it hadn't in years. Tractors were hauled from storage, cleaned and oiled. The sound of hammers repairing fence lines echoed through the air. Seedlings were ordered, irrigation lines tested. The laughter of workers, genuine, unforced, filled the air, blending with the chirping of sparrows and the distant hum of machinery. As dusk settled, the workers set up a long table in the yard. Someone brought grilled fish, another produced jars of homemade kimchi. Rice steamed in great pots. Someone else brought makgeolli, pouring cups with shaking hands and grateful smiles. They toasted, not just to the farm, but to beginnings, to reclamation, to truth. Hae-jin, who had driven down for the day, raised her cup to So-yeon. "I knew you'd come back here, I just didn't know it would feel like this." So-yeon laughed softly. "Neither did I." As night deepened, lanterns were strung between the ginkgo trees. Music, old folk songs her father used to play on a battered radio, floated through the air. Children chased fireflies. Elders sat sharing stories of the farm's early days, of storms weathered and harvests celebrated. Standing beneath the ginkgo tree, So-yeon looked up. The stars shimmered above, silent witnesses to everything. The betrayals, the victories, the wounds, the healing. She placed her hand against the tree's trunk. "I'm home," she whispered. And for the first time in years, the words felt true. The small wooden pendant sat on Han So-yeon's desk, its smooth surface worn from years of handling. Inside, the tiny USB drive that had once seemed nothing more than a hidden trinket was now a relic of survival, of truth. It carried not just files, not just signatures and recordings, but the voice of a father who had refused to let the people he loved be erased, even beyond death. In the weeks following the trial, the farm flourished as life returned to its fields. The laughter of workers, the hum of machinery, and the rhythmic sounds of planting, harvesting, and repairing echoed day and night. Customers returned to buy the produce, neighbors who had once doubted now sent letters of apology, and partnerships long broken began to mend. But for So-yeon, something larger was taking root. One quiet morning, as sunlight streamed through the farmhouse window, she sat surrounded by papers, not legal documents this time, but blueprints, proposals, and vision statements. At the top of every page was a name written in crisp, clean Hangul, Jin Simeon Sarajiji Annunda, the E. Honesty Does Not Disappear Foundation. The idea had come to her during one sleepless night under the ginkgo tree. The fight she had endured was not just her own. It was the fight of every adopted child told they did not belong, every orphan dismissed as unworthy, every voice silenced. By wealth, by power, by corruption, her father's voice had reached her through a simple USB hidden in a pendant. A fragile thing, easily broken, easily lost, yet it had carried the power to overturn injustice. And now it would carry more. The Foundation's mission was simple but profound: to provide legal aid, psychological support, and financial assistance to orphans, adoptees, and anyone fighting against unjust erasure of their rights. Whether it was inheritance theft, identity, suppression, or systemic discrimination, the Foundation would stand as a beacon for those whose voices were ignored. Donations poured in faster than she expected. Former employees, local businesses, even strangers who had followed her story in the media contributed. Messages arrived daily, some from adoptees who had suffered similar betrayals, others from parents who had fought to protect children that were not bound by blood, but by love. On the day of the Foundation's official launch, So-yeon stood before a modest crowd gathered beneath the ginkgo tree, the same tree that had witnessed her childhood joys and her darkest nights. She held the wooden pendant in her hands as she spoke. "This," she began, raising it for everyone to see, "saved my life." Her voice was steady, clear. "My father knew that sometimes truth is fragile. It has to be protected, hidden, carried in silence until the day it can be revealed. This pendant carried more than data. It carried his belief in me, his faith that truth, no matter how buried, does not disappear." She looked around, meeting the eyes of everyone present. Workers, neighbors, children, elders. This foundation exists because that truth saved me, and now it will save others. Applause filled the air, mingling with the rustling of ginkgo leaves. Reporters captured the moment, but for So-yeon, it was not about headlines. It was about a quiet promise fulfilled, a circle closed. Later, as the sun dipped below the hills, she placed the pendant inside a glass case in the farmhouse. Beneath it, a brass plaque read, "For every voice that was told, it did not matter. The truth does not disappear." In the months that followed, the Foundation grew beyond anything she could have imagined. Cases were won. Families were reunited. Children who had once been cast aside found not just support, but belonging. And the farm thrived alongside it. Every morning, So-yeon walked the fields her father had once tended. She greeted the workers by name. She touched the soil, inspected the crops, and sometimes paused beneath the ginkgo tree, her silent witness, her oldest friend. Her father's voice still echoed in her memory. "Do not let them erase you, So-yeon." And she never had. The pendant remained, not just as a symbol of what was lost and reclaimed, but as a reminder that no matter how small, how hidden, or how fragile the truth may seem, it endures, always.